All right, guys, welcome yet to another episode of the Sustainability and Climate Podcast. I remain my humble self, Oluwatobi Aibogun, and as usual, no leave, no transfer. I have the one and only Labake Ajiboye Richard. How you doing, Labake?
Hi, everybody. I am well. I am great. I'm currently on holiday, but filming for the podcast. See how committed to the audience I
Whatever. But
am.
anyways, how have you been? How have you been?
I've been good. I've been good. I've been good. I've been good. Working and enjoying a little bit of the summer.
Okay.
Summer holidays. Yeah, so I got to spend time with family, which has been nice. Yeah, I've been good. How have you been?
Guys, Labake has been in
No.
the UK on two different occasions, and we have not had time to see. But I'm happy that this year, hopefully, it will not be the same that we get to see because when you have a co-host who is always in this part of the world today, this part of the world tomorrow, and even when they're in your city, you don't get to see them because they're very busy. I'm hoping that this time I get to see Labake. So please, guys, beg, plead, go on your knees, roll on the floor, and tell Labake to have my time because we know we are not up to the level of people that she creates time to see, but we are hoping that this time that she's in the beautiful sunny city of London, she will have my time. And I just wanted to put it out there so that if I don't get to see you, I'll come back to the podcast and
Maybe
let
he's
our listeners
begging.
know.
Jamie is begging for sympathy because he's very aware that he's not the favorite on this podcast.
I
But
just had
no,
to do what I had to do.
you
But
have to do
yeah,
what you have to do. I respect the hustle. But no, we'll definitely see each other soon. Maybe record an episode in person for the podcast. You never know. You never
you
know.
never know. You never know. You never
You
know.
never
As
know.
we are coming to the end of season 3 of the
Yeah.
podcast, yes, we first of all want to thank you guys for sticking with us for the last 2 years, 3 episodes, 3 seasons rather. Amazing episodes with you guys. Thank you so much for all your support. We see you listening. We see the support that you give to us. So just want to say thank you as we are almost coming to the end of this episode, this season, sorry. Yes,
Yeah.
season 3 of the Sustainability and Climate Podcast. What have you been up to,
Yes.
Labake? Tell our listeners.
So before I do that, I just wanted to say thank you as well, and also ask. So this is the first season that we've had a visual podcast,
Yeah,
right? Where you get to see our faces every day, you get to see our expressions,
yeah.
and when we are trying to hide from laughing during some of the episodes.
Yeah.
So I wanted to say thank you. And also, do you prefer the visual episode, or should we go back to kind of just an audio podcast? Please let us know. Comment. Let us know. I'm happy to hear
Yeah.
from you. What have I been up to? It's working really. I feel like it's going to be a busy end of the year, like last
Yeah.
quarter of the year. I have quite a few things going on work-wise, not just within kind of my circle of work, but I feel like globally as well, there are all the kind of conferences lined up between September and November, COP30 is happening. So a lot of things are kind of happening towards that as well. So I feel like there's a lot of professional work kind of scheduled in tandem with that. So this is gearing up to be a busy end of the year. So I'm just kind of chilling and enjoying the summer a little bit. It's a little bit slower, which I'm not mad at. Um, really not. But yeah, how about you?
Yeah, I've been good. I've been busy, very busy. I just launched a new project,
No.
which we'll be announcing later this month. We have an event in October, and so it's
I
been
guess
a
invited.
yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely.
Great.
More information will be shared on the podcast as we go
Good.
along. But yes, I'm excited about this new project that I am doing, and I'm looking forward to what the future holds with it. And adding that to the many list of things that I do, which I enjoy doing, I must say. But yes, that's what I've been building and nurturing for the
Awesome.
last couple of months. And like they always say, the food already. It is time for me to serve it to the general
Awesome.
public. So yeah,
Okay. Those of us that have a seat at the table are super excited to see who's joining us at the table.
yes, 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 yes,
Awesome.
yes. All right,
Awesome.
so today we
Okay.
have a very amazing, interesting guest on the podcast,
Yep.
who is an eminent writer. And interestingly, the time we were recording this episode, he released his latest book last week. And so he's someone who is a big campaigner on sustainable development, climate change, and the likes. And trust me, guys, you guys will enjoy this episode. We have Jonathon Porritt, who is the co-founder of the Forum for the Future. And so, guys, sit back, relax, grab a cup of water, tea, coffee, whatever you take. If you're walking or doing exercise while listening to the podcast, this is going to be an interesting one for you. Stay tuned, guys. All right, guys, welcome back to yet another episode of the podcast. As we mentioned, we have a very amazing guest on the podcast. Like we always do, all our guests are amazing. But today we have the one and only Jonathon Porritt, who is an eminent writer and campaigner on sustainable development. Since stepping down from his role at the Forum for the Future in May 2023, he has returned to his campaigning roots by supporting the Green Party and radical climate campaigns such as Just Stop Oil and Defend Our Juries. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor to have Jonathon on the podcast. Hi, Jonathon. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Toby. Delighted to be joining you today. And I'm sure we're going to have an interesting conversation, that's for certain.
Awesome. So you've been at the forefront of the sustainability movement for more than 30 years. You've advised government, businesses, civil societies. Looking back, what moment or rather shift have you most defined as the evolution of sustainability from the margins to the mainstream?
I think that whichever way you look at it, what happened in 1992 at the Earth Summit was really crucially important. Not only did it produce the consensus behind two critical parts of global legislation, the Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Convention on Biological Diversity, but it also provided opportunities for business to realize that this was a crucial challenge that they were going to have to step up and deal with. Civil society was there in huge numbers, working really closely, both with governments and with business. There was a very strong presence there from all sorts of different constituencies in society, whether that was religious and spiritual groups or women's groups or farmers. And out of that moment, the Earth Summit in 1992, a huge amount of sustainability energy started to flow from that point on. And I think you can track a lot of the initiatives that we see today going right back to that moment. Now, unfortunately, I'm sure we'll come on and talk about this. What was given voice at that global meeting has not really landed in the way that we would have wanted. And we've largely wasted the decades that have passed since 1992.
Awesome.
Interesting. So if you say we've wasted, I just wanted to pick up on that for a second. If you say we've wasted the decade since 1992, which is, I do agree with that to an extent of there's not been enough progress. We haven't seen as much progress as we'd want to see. Can you, maybe one thing that you would highlight that we've done or seen significant progress in the past, 33 years?
Honestly, it's really difficult when you ask me to come up with examples of significant progress.
Okay, fair.
We have made progress across a wide range of different issues. We've seen many constituencies get more involved. The whole world of corporate sustainability, for instance, has become a very important part of the overall picture of what sustainability is about. And there are literally thousands of companies now involved in one way or another in sustainability thinking and implementation of ideas and practices and so on. And that's been significant. Whether it's been significant enough to move the needle is another matter. And I suppose what I'm looking at is I'm trying to look at the empirical evidence here about whether we've really done a good enough job addressing the twin climate and nature crises, and whether we could look back on those 35 years or 30 years or so and say, we started something really great there, and here are the beneficial consequences of what we started there. I don't think we're in that position today.
Fair enough. And thank you for your gracious answer. So in a time, sorry, I'm just reading from my phone here, but in a time of eco-anxiety and growing polarization, how do you personally cultivate hope And why is hope a necessary ingredient in climate action?
It's very difficult for individuals to carry on with their campaigning work without retaining some kind of hope that we've got an opportunity still to address this challenge full on with the right kind of timely and proportionate action. I make a big distinction between hope and optimism. Mm-hmm. And for me, what I hear an awful lot of coming from politicians and people who are obsessed with technology and who still think that the situation isn't as bad as it is, they are very optimistic about a world that has got on top of the climate crisis. Now, I have literally no time for that very brittle, superficial approach to optimism. And indeed, it tells me that those people are actually trapped in today's paradigm and have no intention of thinking beyond the paradigm in order to come up with the much more profound transformational solutions that we need. So I'm happy to own up to being still a hopeful person. My last book that I wrote, I've just got a new book out, as you know, called Love, Anger, and Betrayal. But the book that I wrote before that, back in 2020, was called Hope in Hell. And obviously, I was trying to remind people that we're heading in this hellish direction because of accelerating climate change. But part of the resources that we need to address that crisis is to have this inner resilience, inner hopefulness, the determination to turn hope into action. And that's why I'm all in favor of people sticking to their hopeful guns, as it were. But optimists usually don't change anything in their lives or do anything differently, which makes them all a bit of a waste of space, frankly.
Interesting. So what would you say then the key differences between a hopeful person and an optimist? I think the limitations are...
Yeah. As I just said, optimists are not looking at the crisis for what it is. You couldn't be an optimist if you properly understood the nature of the climate crisis. It's not possible to be an optimist.
Right.
And when we're confronting a future now, which means that hundreds of millions of people will be profoundly and negatively affected by the combination of climate breakdown and the collapse in nature, in key ecosystems of the kind that we're already beginning to see. That is now unavoidable. It doesn't matter what we do. If we stopped burning all fossil fuels tomorrow, if we stopped trashing nature tomorrow, we still could not avoid that amount of traumatic dislocation for human societies. And that's a consequence of us not doing anything about the emission of greenhouse gases and about sustainable land use for the last 30 years or more. So if you're honest about that science and you're looking at what that science tells us, and you're still an optimist, there's something a bit crazy with your brain, okay? So I'm still hopeful that we can address all of those things to avoid a total collapse in human societies, because I'm sure we're all in favor of that. That's what keeps me hopeful. That's what keeps me applied to this challenge. But I'm not optimistic about what it means for humankind.
Right. So hope is then kind of the belief that if we change our ways, these things hopefully can happen. And optimism is kind of expecting it, even though we're staying the course that we currently are on.
Exactly. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay.
Now let me go back to your journey, right? You were formerly the co-chair of the Green Party between 1980 to 1983, director of Friends of the Earth from 1984 to 1990 rather. You were a board member of the Southwest Regional Development Agency 1999 to 2008. You stood down as the chair of the UK Sustainable Development Commission in 2000 after 9 amazing years of providing high-level advice to government ministers, and serviced a 10-year term as a chancellor at Keele University, which interestingly was one of the universities my brother attended. And in 2000, you were awarded a CBE for services to environmental protection. So here's where I'm going with my question. Do you think that as individuals, we are doing our very best, and also as well as government, in protecting our environment?
No. Self-evidently not, Toby. I'm sorry. A lot of individuals are doing what they feel they can. They have started to change the way in which they live. They've thought differently about what they eat, exactly what they should be out there looking for in terms of the local environment. They've often changed the way they travel. They're trying to make their homes more energy efficient. So don't get me wrong, there are millions and millions of people all around the world that are trying to reduce their own personal footprint on the natural environment and on other people. But that does not aggregate to the level where we see wholesale change in society. That's the problem. The direction of travel for society as a whole, particularly in the rich world, is still very problematic, very destructive, and still requires an enormous amount of political transformation to get us back in balance with the natural systems on which we depend. So I'm not in any way disparaging or belittling the importance of personal responsibility. That is crucial to what needs to happen next. But nobody should have any illusions that that kind of personalized approach is sufficient to the challenge that we face, because it absolutely can't be.
Yeah, but we're often told that we are facing two emergencies, the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis. What's your perspective on how these two are interconnected? And just like the previous question, are we treating them with equal urgency?
I think it's become clearer and clearer to people just how closely connected the two are, the climate and the nature crisis, if you like. They used to exist scientifically and politically in two completely different silos. Climate scientists would work away at stuff over here, and nature scientists would work away at stuff over here. But now we understand that the whole thing is much more intricately connected than that. And just to give you one example, we are now seeing all around the world an increased incidence of what are called marine heat waves. Now, this means the average temperature of the oceans is often subjected to incredible extremes of warming in the marine environment. We're used to what that looks like in the terrestrial environment, but we're talking now about warming in the marine environment. A report published last week that the Great Barrier Reef has just gone through its worst ever impact on the corals in the natural reef, the so-called bleaching effect that we see as a consequence of warmer waters. Now, that's a climate-induced disaster. The impact on biodiversity will be absolutely massive. And reefs are critical cornerstone ecosystems on which literally thousands and thousands of marine creatures of one kind or another depend. And of course, on which many millions and millions of people also depend for their own livelihoods. So it's the shift in the climate that has brought about that damage to the natural environment in our reef systems around the world. And you can see literally countless examples now where accelerating climate change has worsened the impacts that humankind already makes on the natural world.
Awesome. Just also mention to our listeners, the Jonathon has a book called Open Air, How We Can Confront the Climate Crisis and Save the Earth. It's on Leading Bookstore, and we'll also put a link in the description.
That's true.
His new one.
Ah, yes, my new one, though, Toby. You've got to mention my new one.
Yeah.
This is where I come to do a little bit of a commercial plug, do you think? So,
go ahead.
Thank you very much. This is my new one. It's called Love, Anger, and Betrayal, and it was launched last week.
Oh, okay. Awesome.
So this is after 18 months of working with young climate campaigners in the organization, which I'm sure most of your subscribers to the podcast will know about, called Just Stop Oil, which has been highly controversial. as a radical direct action campaigning group, was in existence for 3 years before it decided to hang up the high vis, as they put it. And I started working with 26 of the young Just Stop Oil campaigners to produce this book together. So I've written half of it, which is an account of the climate crisis as it is today, a bit of a history about nonviolent direct action, some of the accounts of what's happening in law and in politics and in science. And the other half of the book is written by the 26 co-authors from Just Stop Oil. And the whole purpose of it is to give those young people a voice, to allow them to speak to people directly through the book, so that we don't hear these appalling versions, misrepresentations of what young campaigners are trying to achieve here in the UK, which we see, in practice, pretty much all we see in the UK's really abhorrent right-wing media, which has spent most of the last 3 years, to be honest, trying to destroy the reputations and the integrity of those campaigners. So I wanted to put the balance right to allow people to hear from themselves why young people today are in despair about the climate crisis. They are absolutely incensed with the failure of politicians to get to grips with it. They take the science extremely seriously, unlike most of the politicians who sort of listen to the science and then get on and do what they were going to do anyway, including, of course, the continued use of fossil fuels all over the global economy. And I wanted to give those young people a chance to be heard on their own terms in a way that I hope will inspire people, actually, because they are an amazing group of young people.
Awesome. I look forward to digging into that, and I hope our audience would as well. It will be great to hear from the horse's mouth, as they say. But you started talking about working with the youth, and my next question, coincidentally, is about that as well. So you've worked closely with a lot of youth-led movements, and you've spoken, as you've just done again, about the need for intergenerational justice. So how do you see the role of young people evolving in climate action, and what more can older generations do to support them?
Yeah, that's the big thing. I mean, we all have very short memories, and I suspect a lot of people have forgotten that as recently as 2018, the youth climate movement was global, very impactful, and very influential in terms of shifting people's perception and their actions. All started with Greta Thunberg holding up that one sign outside her school strike for the climate. Within a year, 1 million young people were out on the streets of their cities and towns protesting about politicians' inability to address the climate crisis properly. Now, that was the high point of young people's involvement in the climate movement. Unfortunately, COVID came pretty soon after that. That was a devastating experience for young people everywhere in the world today. Not just in school, but in terms of their home experiences and so on. And since then, since COVID, we've not seen a resurgence of youth-led climate campaigning. There's still a lot of young people involved in climate campaigning, but not in the same way as we saw back then. So for me, I expect young people will continue to be very involved. They obviously recognize that the biggest impacts of the climate crisis are going to be on them in the second half of this century. They are just desperate to get politicians to understand the importance of justice between generations, because the way my generation continues to live is essentially at the expense of young people today and all future generations. So we face this systemic issue of intergenerational injustice. That is, the generation that command the economy and resources and the media today are behaving in such a way that the interests of young people and all future generations will be seriously impacted, negatively impacted. So that's my passion today, is working for that story about greater justice between generations. And that has implications both for young people and of course for older people. And many older people recognize that we are passing on something of a blighted future to young people as a consequence of what we've both done actively and what we've failed to do.
Now,
Like that.
that's also, so you've talked about youth-led movements. Let's look at corporations, corporate organizations, and their commitment, because there's this increasing scrutiny on corporate climate pledges, right? How do you see the role of independent accountability mechanisms and civil society pressure in holding these companies into their net zero commitments?
Well, I spent roughly 30 years of my life working with companies, mostly large companies, but not completely. We set up Forum for the Future in 1996. I was also involved in setting up the Prince of Wales's Business and Sustainability Program, which is still, both organizations are still thriving, which is good. And it's fair to say that the work with corporates needs to go on. Companies need as much external advice and challenge and encouragement as they can get, because most companies still don't really understand the full extent of their responsibilities and their obligations. So I'm still wholly in favor of civil society organizations, think tanks, NGOs, academics, continuing to work with business to make them basically less unsustainable. We don't have any sustainable businesses to speak of on the planet, but the primary goal at the moment is to make them less unsustainable, which is what they are at the moment. Now, up until about 5 years ago, maybe a bit more than that, I felt we were making really good progress. I felt companies in most sectors had got their heads around the nature of the crisis. And don't forget, it's a threefold crisis, not just climate and nature, it's also social justice, fairness, economic equity, dealing with those systemic issues about how the economy rewards a tiny fraction of humankind and allows huge numbers of people in global society to suffer unnecessarily as a consequence of a poor distribution of wealth. So it's a threefold challenge for companies. And I thought we were making pretty good progress. But then I realized actually things weren't really changing. And the reason why they weren't changing significantly was those companies don't write the rules of the game. They are all working within the system, which is determined by rules written by politicians. And those rules essentially today reflect the nature of our neoliberal capitalist system. Companies have to work to those rules. If the laws of any land say your primary responsibility is to meet the needs and expectations of your shareholders, and you must maximize profit in order to satisfy those shareholders, then they'll never do as much as they need to in terms of other stakeholders, society at large, employees, suppliers, nature, the climate, etc., etc. So I suppose I'd always known it, but I realized at that stage that even the most powerful CEO of some of the most powerful multinational companies, even if they really wanted to do things very differently, they were pretty much powerless. And we've actually seen that now writ large since Trump became president of the United States for the second time, where he has forced very large companies to go back on many of their commitments in terms of climate, in terms of diversity and inclusion, in terms of what they were doing in the local community on social justice issues and so on. And that just shows that most of those companies, although they got pretty good at telling people how good they were on these things, most of those companies didn't really mean it. And we can see now how self-serving, short-termist, profit-driven the vast majority of the world's corporates still are today.
Perfect. Perfect way to segue to my next question, because I want to ask about truly purpose-driven companies, right? And over your career, you've advised a lot of corporations on embedding sustainability. So what would you say then distinguishes truly purpose-driven companies from those that are simply ticking ESG boxes?
There was a very important push towards getting companies to define what their purpose was in society as a whole, not just their purpose to generate surplus for shareholders, but what was their overarching mission in society? What made their company a useful contributor to social well-being as a whole? And that led to a whole almost 10 years worth of companies rethinking what their purpose might be, redefining their contribution to social value, to what makes a difference to people in their local communities, around factories and places where they work, and nationally, when they're thinking of the contribution they make more broadly to the economy. Now, I felt that companies really went through many of those purpose exploration processes with genuine integrity. I don't think that was all greenwash. I believe a lot of companies were doing that with real integrity, as I say. But a lot of it has proved to be somewhat ephemeral. Many of those purpose-driven companies have now defaulted to what I suppose we have to accept is the overarching purpose of wealth creators in a capitalist economy, which is to generate as much surplus, as in profit, through dividends for those people who, quote, own those companies, the shareholders. And you'd have to say that it's clear that that is now reconfirmed as the principal purpose of big business today. There's a kind of resurgence of Milton Friedman and all of his kind of stuff, that the purpose of business is basically to meet the needs and expectations of their shareholders. And the rest, well, it can sort of look after itself. The rest is down to government. And we just hope government doesn't intervene too much and get in the way of generating these surpluses. So the purpose-driven movement was influential, changed the minds of a lot of people in a lot of companies. Has it lasted? Not really. No, it's nothing like as influential now as it was then.
So I just want to pick on that for a second, because as you mentioned before, the change in administration in the US has forced a lot of these companies that might have started out with integrity in the purpose-driven journey to kind of change course. And I'm just, curious. I don't know if this is a hopeful curiosity or an optimistic one. Do you think we're going to see them kind of turn back in a more integrity-driven approach to sustainability anytime soon? Or
President Trump has got a particular way of doing this in America. He actually calls companies out by name. Mm. And he insists that if they want to benefit from public procurement contracts, for instance, if they want to be close to what the presidency and the politics of the MAGA movement is all about, then they need to do exactly as he says. And let me give you one particular example, one sectoral example of this, which is banking. Now, I've never honestly had much faith in the banking community. My experience of dealing with bankers has been rather wretched, to be honest. I mean, they are essentially there to keep the wheels of the economy going and to make as much money out of that as they possibly can. But 4 or 5 years ago, every single major bank in the world signed up to one or another of these voluntary initiatives to try and make their lending more conducive to capital flows, helping the important things, sustainable things in life, rather than the capital flows destroying, the equivalent of destroying the life on Earth. And whether that was the Global Financial Alliance for Net Zero, the so-called GFANZ movement, or the Net Zero Banking Alliance, whatever it might be, they all had a high level of voluntary commitments to do more to shift capital flows in the global economy and promote investments that protected and reinforce the natural world and a stable climate, rather than directing capital permanently into those things that were undermining the physical foundations of the economy. Now, a lot of people at the time said, yeah, this is just greenwash. These are big global banks. They don't give a stuff about anything to do with the environment. At least the only thing they care about is how much money can they make out of the physical environment. But otherwise, they don't have any concern about it whatsoever. And so it has proved to be. Since Trump got in as president, every single one of those major American banks first pulled out of all of those different voluntary agreements. They all said, our job now is to deliver as much profit and growth as possible. If that means recommitting to huge new investments in fossil fuels, we'll do that, because that's what the mandate is today. And a lot of the European banks have followed suit. Despicably, banks like HSBC and Barclays have now thrown in the towel. They're now exposed all over again as absolutely greed-driven, extractive, profiteering leeches on society. So that's where they are. Banks today are leeches. They just suck wealth out of everything that makes society work. So I'm sorry, that's one sector I've picked. I could have picked several other sectors, but let's settle for banking, okay?
Yeah, yeah, that's okay. So you stepped down from your role at the Forum for the Future in May 2023, and one thing the forum, as long before cost on, it was on system change, right? What are the key leverage points you believe still remain unutilized in terms of accelerating a just and sustainable transition?
I think that the whole idea of trying to change parts of a system is still absolutely crucial. I mean, I worked for 20 years, for instance, with nearly 20 years, 15 years with Unilever, a very big, fast-moving consumer goods company. And Unilever pioneered a whole number of different ways of improving its performance environmentally, socially, from a governance point of view, and so on. But even a company as big and influential as Unilever could not change those systems on its own. So we began to understand the significance of what are often referred to as coalitions of the willing, companies coming together to effect a bigger change in a particular system. And I'll give you again one example. Because of huge concerns about continuing levels of deforestation all around the world, but mostly in the forest hotspots, whether that's Brazil or Indonesia or Democratic Republic of Congo, we realized that companies sourcing their raw materials from those countries needed to play a proactive role in limiting and hopefully stopping deforestation of the products, the goods that came from those forests, particularly things like palm oil. Now, that whole movement for deforestation-free supply chains, so sourcing the raw materials that you need from forest areas, but without contributing to worsening deforestation, that whole deforestation-free supply chains movement was led by companies essentially working with NGOs on the ground to bring about those kind of changes. And although we don't hear very much about this, a lot of it was extremely effective. Deforestation rates go up and down. Unfortunately, they're going back up again in Brazil, but most of the world doesn't understand the huge reduction in deforestation was brought about in Indonesia as a consequence of trying to find more sustainable ways of using the land, the forested land, on which so much of its wealth actually depends. So that's why system change remains really important. A lot of those global initiatives are weakened now. They're not as powerful, influential as they were before, but I'm pretty certain that will come back again. I haven't given up on that idea of coalitions of the willing to shift whole parts of the corporate system.
I like that. Coalitions of the willing, shifting whole parts of the corporate system. I think this has been a really interesting conversation. But we'd like to kind of round off by asking our guests to give one piece of advice, concrete action, or shift in mindset that you would like our listeners, whether they be individuals, corporate organizations, to take away from this conversation. So call to action, if you will.
Yes, well, my one thing that I ask of everybody these days is to find out for themselves what the truth is of the climate crisis. And that has become a priority for me because, unfortunately, I don't believe most people have anything like the depth of knowledge that they need about the climate crisis. Now, if you go back a bit here in the UK in 2018, when Extinction Rebellion, which was the first of these direct action movements to kind of explode on the streets of the UK, the first thing that Extinction Rebellion XR made as its demand of people and of governments was tell the truth. Because it isn't until you understand how serious the climate crisis is that you're likely to start thinking about doing things really differently. And because we all live in a world where most of the media are owned by hugely powerful billionaire magnates, plutocrats, oligarchs, call them what you will, who control the majority of the world's global media, we don't hear the truth. Most people don't hear the truth. So my ask of anybody here is you've got to get outside of this bubble where you think maybe you've got a good handle on the science of climate change and set yourself a proper ambition to spend the next month of your life finding out what is really going on. And go to the source of the authoritative advice that is available now. Go to organizations like the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Or if you live in a country which has a really prestigious scientific academy, they all have fantastic, clear descriptions of just how serious the climate crisis is. So here in the UK, the Royal Society, which is obviously the pinnacle of establishment thinking and science, and hardly a bunch of radical activists, the Royal Society has brilliant information for people to get their heads around what is happening with the climate crisis. So I feel really strongly about this. We all have an obligation to do what we can to address the climate crisis, but that is dependent on understanding what is actually happening, rather than the rubbish that most of the right-wing media tell us about the climate crisis.
All right. Awesome. Wow, what an interesting episode, guys. Thank you so much, Jonathon. I always have something to say, but at this point, I don't have anything to say, but say thank you. I think it is important that we find the truth by ourselves and not depend on what we read in the media. But yeah, I just want to say thank you, Jonathon. We look forward to having you back on the podcast, and also I will be posting the link for your books on the podcast description. So for anyone, please go read it and find some truth for yourself by reading Jonathon's book. I just want to say thank you for coming on the podcast, and we'll definitely keep an eye on all the amazing things that you do.
Well, thanks very much to both of you. I really enjoyed the conversation. It's been great. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
All right, guys. Till next time, keep protecting the environment.